Welcome back to the Pleb Underground, another live episode, another live discussion. Joining me today, fellow Bitcoiner, and this is a Bitcoiner that I have followed for a really long time, heavily armed clown. He and Ben Prentice, or BP Cool, as some people may remember, they started the website WTF Happened in 1971. And for people like me, when I first joined Bitcoin and did not really fully understand exactly what the money printing actually meant for us and in terms of our purchasing power, that website was absolutely instrumental. But guys, that is not what we are going to be talking about today. Heavily armed clown is going to be discussing with us, that's right, the never-ending Opportune drama. You guys asked for it. You said, Phil, how can we talk about more Opportune? We haven't had enough discussions. I was like, you know what, guys, you're right. Going to get the right guests to have this discussion. And so, without further ado, we're going to give some love to the sponsors. We're going to be right back, and then we are going to dive into the op return. Here we go. Head on over to Archimedes Emporium. They make absolutely beautiful Bitcoin branded products. They just dropped their first one. It is the solid aluminum Bitcoin clock. I had to get my hands on it so that I could show it to you guys. Take a look. Really, really nice piece. Beautiful craftsmanship. Head on over to archamp.co. The link is going to be in the show notes. That is Archimedes Emporium. Head on over there. All right. Heavily armed clown. Thank you so much for joining me on Pleb Underground, man. This is it's an honor, and you're definitely somebody that I've wanted to speak to for a very long time, and I think that this is a fantastic opportunity for us to kind of have this this first greeting. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
Hey, Phil, that's a pleasure, man. Thank you for the kind introduction. Yeah, I know you want me to like say a few words about myself, but like I'm a pretty private guy. I try to have a lot of humility. I don't like to brag about, do you know who I am and what I've done? And I'm just not that guy. So like, yeah, we did create that WTF Happened in 1971 thing. And, but like by trade, I'm a software engineer, and a lot of my time is spent like just lurking these days and coding and just being a family man. So but I'm glad to be here and to talk to you.
I really, honestly, like I said, I really appreciate it. And I think that it's really important. You know, I totally understand the whole aspect of, hey, you know, look at me, look at what I've done and all of that stuff. I mean, that there is so much of that. So it's obviously very refreshing when we speak to somebody that is not all about that particular, you know, that particular aspect. And especially, in all fairness, what we're seeing right now in Bitcoin, I genuinely, I feel like there's an uptick in that behavior, right? I genuinely feel like that's what's happening. But anyways, we're not going to talk about the social commentary necessarily that's happening in and around Bitcoin. And if you want to put in quotations the word community, instead, what we're going to focus on is the Opportune drama. Now, you said before, just before that, you're a software developer. So I think that this is going to be a really good discussion, and to give people, you know, like a different perspective. So just so you know, I've had a couple of guests on previously, and both of them also were software developers. And it's kind of interesting that, I don't know, I don't think it has necessarily anything to do with the fact that you guys are software developers, but I do find it interesting that you all seem to sound approximately the same, which then starts to make me think, okay, so is there one side that is appealing to emotion and another side that is more appealing to functionality? You know, that's kind of the way I'm seeing it right now. But all right, we're going to pull up your tweet. I want to read this because I think it matters. So here we go. It's a post you put up yesterday. So, you want to know my most controversial opinion in Bitcoin? I can say this because I'm not trying to sell you anything. Everyone else wants to pat you on the head and tell you that you're special for existing. Plebs are not a vanguard or a bulwark. They are not sovereign, and they do not verify. They are consumers. Bitcoin doesn't need consumers. Only bad products need consumers. Good products solve problems, and consumers will literally stand in line with their wallet in hand to have their problem solved. Plebs need Bitcoin. The only thing unique about plebs is that they understand the problem Bitcoin solves. It's the money. Nobody is impressed that you read a dozen books about economics. It's sophomoric. Everybody here knows the problem. This is not meant to be an insult. This is just the truth. I too am a consumer of Bitcoin. Most plebs don't compile source code. Most plebs don't verify binary signatures. Most plebs don't bug test. If plebs do run a node, chances are it's economically irrelevant to the network consensus because they never even learned how to use it or what it's for. Most plebs got their seed phrase from a glorified USB stick. This is, yeah, I'd say that's accurate. Someone mailed to their house because an influencer got a $5 kickback for a referral link. No lies detected yet. Cypherpunks that write code are what keep Bitcoin functioning. Without experts in cryptography, networking, and distributed systems, everyone goes back to using shiny boomer rocks. Non-technical people have been mollycoddled into thinking they're smarter and more valuable than the collective efforts of some of the best engineers in the world contributing to Bitcoin Core. Sounds like a color revolution to me, at best. Where that leads you is into some cultish fringe splinter group that will chew you up, spit you out, and rug a fork token with your life savings as their exit liquidity. Don't like it? Show me up. Go learn to code. I'm only telling you this because I don't want to see you get wrecked by bad actors and ulterior motives. Okay. Not going to lie, that was pretty heavy. And in all fairness, I can't say, I can't actually find anything really wrong with, with what you stated there. So I gotta ask you though, what do you think the goal is in this whole knots versus core debate? Like what is the end result? Because to your point, right? I watched your video, which, guys, I'm going to put the video. The video is going to be in the show notes. But I watched your video presentation about this, and it makes me wonder. Is there somehow an ulterior motive in creating this divide?
Yeah. So, about 5 years ago, we entered into what a lot of us have called like World War III, and there's like a lot of hot war, like proxy hot war, but so far World War III has been information war. And
Yeah.
what Bitcoin really is a Sybil resistant source of truth, meaning that it's like this copy of history that a bunch of people have been able to get together and agree, yes, this is the true and verifiable record of history. So really what we're talking about when we're talking about Bitcoin, and we're talking about like Bitcoin and technical decisions and the politicking around Bitcoin, it's an information war battlefield. And it is really kind of the centerpiece of the battlefield because it's one of the only places that you can go where you can find verifiable truth. So, when you're on Twitter and when you're reading GitHub PRs and when you're engaging with any of this, you're entering the information warfare battlefield. And you'll notice this just when you engage with people on Twitter. Um, everybody is well equipped, right? Like everybody has tons of information and they fire information bullets at you constantly. And a lot of times it feels like you're arguing with robots, right? That are just trying to empty the clip. And in some cases you might these days be arguing with robots because people might just be like feeding you AI prompts to waste your time or to try to convince you of what they already believe. But that doesn't leave a lot of room for nuance and it doesn't leave a lot of room for critical thinking. So there's a Dunning-Kruger is dangerous, right? Like it's easy to accumulate a lot of experience in something and think that you have expertise, but you can get a lot of experience in something and not know what you're doing, right? Like you can do something the wrong way
Yes.
for 100 years and then find out that you were doing it wrong all along, right? But you didn't have expertise. You had experience, but it was wrongly informed.
Yeah, I think that that's a great point. I can tell you myself through my own journey in Bitcoin, and I am not a software developer. My background is in network administration, but yes, I have definitely fallen for that. Right, where I learned so much information that I believed that my conclusions were correct based on the information that I thought I understood, but that wasn't the case at all. And as a result, I've had to reframe and revisit these different ideas over and over again. So yeah, I definitely.
Yeah, I bring all that context up because you asked me what is the point of all of this. Well,
Yeah.
the point of this is that it's warfare, right? I mean, the point of this is to lob grenades, to fire mortar shells. Like it's a battlefield, right? And there are people attacking, and you don't always know who's even attacking you, right? Like you just know that you're being attacked, and I mean that's so where a lot of the misconception with a lot of this starts, in my opinion, is that the from a technical perspective, the spam on the Bitcoin network should really be thought of as an economic attack, right? Like this is a
Yes.
21st century information warfare mortar siege, and the mortars are raining down around us, and it sucks, when it's happening because the fees are spiking, and it makes Bitcoin hard to use, and it makes people laugh at us because they're like, "Oh, Bitcoin's so expensive, it doesn't work, it's failed," and it's not a fun experience, and nobody wants that, right? So every now and then, like we get these mortar bursts and everybody kind of hunkers down, and then the mortars subside for a little bit and we look around, and then the question becomes of, okay, that kind of sucked. What do we think? What's the reaction? And there's a lot of people that, rightfully get very upset by the fact that we're being attacked, and they say that we
Mm.
need to do something. And maybe they're right. I'm not here to say that we shouldn't do anything. But what I am here to say is that we should probably carefully calculate the damage being done, and then we should proceed wisely and not recklessly. And where there's a divergence right now is that there is an attempt to recklessly diverge from the process and protocols in place that got us here, and throw caution to the wind, because if we don't, that next rocket barrage might wipe us out. And it, I don't see it as such dire circumstances. I think that Bitcoin was designed from the very beginning to be able to mitigate these kinds of attacks. It's what proof of work is. It's what proof of work is based on a cryptographic protocol developed by Adam Back called Hashcash. And what it was designed to do was limit email spam by forcing messengers to do some sort of computational work before they were able to send a message and participate in the network. And Bitcoin is really built on top of that idea, because without spam mitigation, it would get crushed really quickly. Like we see, it's really damaging when a bad actor with a bunch of Bitcoin decides to attack the network. But what we're not dealing with here, and this is in my opinion, at least from an engineering perspective, it's really useless to think about this like organic market activity. It needs to be thought of like deliberately well-funded denial of service attacks.
I really appreciate your framing of this, because I do think I do think you're correct. I share I share the same type of opinion. Let me ask you this though, because I can tell you that for me, I end up in this situation where I just throw up my hands, and I'm like, because look, so this is without going too far, I don't think that running knots is the answer. And I'm not saying that what they're doing is necessarily like bad for choosing to run a different implementation client. That's their own business, because to me, like, that doesn't affect the actual consensus, the actual consensus rules. It's just the mempool policy. But I just don't know that that's the actual answer. So I think this goes back to your comment about the the game of whack-a-mole, right? Of cat and mouse being worthwhile. So I do think that this noise that's happening right now is worthwhile, but I don't believe that I guess maybe the real solution has emerged yet. Now, maybe it's because there hasn't been enough pain yet. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you call bullshit on me anytime you want. Like, I'm not, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to be on some pedestal.
Right.
I'm just trying to understand and learn as well, so.
No, totally. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and it's hard to even know where to start. But I would probably start with just the definition of what we mean when we say a competing implementation, because really with Bitcoin, you've got kind of two different parts of, like, if you were to just download Bitcoin Core and like run it on your computer, you've really got like two different sets of features. You've got the user-facing utilities that basically let you interact with the network. This is how you create your wallet. It gives you your private keys. It lets you send and receive Bitcoin, and it allows you to interact with the network in such a way where you're not going to be violating any of the rules. Because the other part of Bitcoin Core is like what we call consensus. It's basically the laws that are set in stone that everybody that runs Bitcoin software agrees to. And anybody that tries to participate in the network that violates those hard-coded laws gets shown the door, right? You can't show up and play in the Bitcoin network if you're not going to follow the same rules. So when we talk about the Bitcoin implementation, in terms of consensus, what we're talking about is the rules that are laid out by Bitcoin Core. That is, by definition, the reference implementation of Bitcoin consensus rules. So when what gets really weird here, and I find it dishonest at best, is when people start talking about competing implementations. Everybody says that Bitcoin Core needs competing implementations. Well, first of all, Bitcoin Core has lots of competing implementations, and they're called shitcoins. We have Litecoin, we have Bitcoin Cash, we have Bitcoin Gold, we have Bitcoin Diamond. There's tens of thousands of them. But you can fork Bitcoin and not necessarily create a competing implementation. Like, there are lots of pieces of Bitcoin software that change user-facing utility that we don't consider implementations. We call these wallets because they're not trying to do anything that violates the rules of consensus as far as the management of the Bitcoin network goes. A lot of times they're just changing user-facing utilities. They're giving users different tools that change how they're allowed to interact with the Bitcoin network. They might give them the ability to do certain things that natively in core can be obtuse or hard to understand or difficult for end users. I mean, like, I've designed, one of the things that I've built as a software engineer is like a Bitcoin multi-signature wallet that uses Miniscript. And it would be cumbersome and complex to try to do with Bitcoin Core. So I took Bitcoin Core and I built a completely different wallet interface on top of Bitcoin Core. But I'm not ever trying to do anything that affects consensus, right? That affects the consensus laws. So I would not call what I've done a different Bitcoin implementation. It's not a competing implementation in terms of what we think about in consensus code. So if you want to try to change what other users are and are not allowed to do on the Bitcoin network, you need to change the laws. You're not going to be able to say, hey, you can and can't do certain things just based on user-facing preferences and utilities. That really violates the spirit of how Bitcoin is designed to work. Bitcoin is designed to work to have this set of shared laws that say this is allowed and this isn't allowed, and you have to follow these rules to participate. So when people start talking about the spam problem and they talk about how we need to make drastic changes to fix the spam problem, they're never going to actually gain any ground on that front without proposing a consensus change. So the inevitable reality with a situation like this, even though nobody is saying this right now except for like me, is that where this road takes us with two competing implementations that have two completely different design directions is two different competing chains, right? Like, where we ultimately end up is the people that think filters are going to solve the spam problem become disenfranchised with the fact that the filters aren't solving the spam problem and push for more drastic changes to the way Bitcoin works. And if those changes deviate from the laws that are accepted by the people that run Bitcoin Core, you end up with two different competing networks, and that's called a fork. And that's when you have two different sets of tokens. And users at that point, it's on them to make the decision which one is Bitcoin and which one is shitcoin. And I was talking about this with Rollo and Slappy last night. We did a pod with them. You know, there's a lot of romanticism of like the Bitcoin Cash days, and particularly I think now it kind of lives in infamy because a lot of newcomers, they just weren't around for it. But it's clear now because we have the bias of present knowledge looking back on Bitcoin Cash. Oh, it's so stupid. Everybody that was around for that got airdropped all this free money. They just, like, as if you don't know, when there is a fork like this, if you have 2 Bitcoin in your Bitcoin wallet, you now also have 2 Bitcoin Cash with the same private keys. And it's going to be up to you to look at that and make the decision, okay, which one do I want to sell? Which one do I want to keep? You know, you might dump one and use all of that to buy another. But if you choose wrong, like, you're going to lose your life savings, right? You're going to lose all the money that you have Bitcoin if you choose the loser. And there are plenty of people that chose the loser in the Bitcoin Cash scenario. They were not well informed enough. And I would argue that what we're dealing with now is much more sophisticated because there's a lot more at stake, because this battlefield is a lot hotter than it was back then.
Excellent points. And of course you brought up the block size wars. I genuinely started to feel the block size war type of vibe probably around the time that ordinals started. Even though I know that has nothing to do with it, it was just kind of like I felt the precedent that it set. You know, that there's going to be a whole group of people that that all of a sudden decide that Bitcoin needs to be more fun, right? Like, it kind of makes me think of Ethereum, right? Look at all the utility, right? So many activities. And in the end, the only activity that was really happening on those shit chains is the rug pulls. Now, I really appreciate you the reframing of implementations, because I was having a bit of an issue with that myself. I was like, wait a second. I'm like, these are all just Bitcoin clients. Like, that's, at the end of the day, that's what this is. This is client software. So why is it being framed as an implementation? And I think, to your point, it has to do with the framing of the severity of the issue. So I think that's what it has to do with. And an example of that was actually this morning in a space I was listening to. Mechanic. I don't know if you know who that is, but he works. He's one of the engineers for ocean mining. He works with Luke, and he made a point, a very interesting one, that Bitcoin Core was going to deprecate the new PR that was entered. So I don't know if you've been following along, but there was Gloria put out another post this morning, essentially that everything. What is it? Everything's been moved into PR 32406, and that particular one aims to change the data carrier size. Okay, and it was an interesting framing this morning that Mechanic gave, because he goes, Bitcoin Core said that the functionality of the upper limit is eventually going to be deprecated, and in Bitcoin Core, that means it's going to be phased out. That, to me, is disingenuous, because deprecation in any software world means that that particular feature gets phased out. So to make it seem as though this is a very specific thing to Bitcoin Core, that actually bothered me. I don't know. I feel like this goes back to the appeal to emotion. I'm trying to be objective about looking at both sides of this argument and trying to figure out who is appealing to emotion more. And I got to tell you, the filters, I feel, are appealing to emotion more. I'm not saying that ruins their argument, but it does make me question the strength of their argument. So
yeah. So the way that I look at a lot of this, like I said, part of the reason that I reframed the spam as denial of service attack, and why I think it's so important to have that framing as an engineer, is because you need to think about your attackers, that they have a budget, right? They have a certain amount of money that they're going to use to attack the network, because that's their goal. Their goal is to attack the network. This isn't like, forget all the stuff you've heard about creative expression and profitable demand for cat pictures on the blockchain. Like, that's freaking nonsense, man. Like, anybody that's telling you that that is a real thing that's driving all of this is just either paid or full of crap. So
Yeah.
if an attacker has money and they're motivated to attack you, you could theoretically look at the way that they're attacking you and cut off that vector of attack. But in a situation like this, where we're running this distributed Sybil resistant database, and really anybody that's in the network can send whatever traffic they want through it as long as it obeys the laws, you can cut off. This is what I was referring to when I was talking about playing whack-a-mole. You can say, hey, you're no longer allowed to spam in that particular way, by making a consensus change that prohibits that type of spam. That's a really risky, reckless thing to do, because it requires a change of the laws. But all your attacker has to do is adjust very slightly to continue attacking you, because that was their goal all along, from a slightly different vector, right? You're at a disadvantage because your enemy can reposition and attack you from literally any direction. So the whole concept of the op return thing needs to go away, and that's going to solve the spam problem, is really kind of a false dichotomy to begin with, because you could come up with any way to encode data into Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is literally just data. It's a database. People don't like that because it comes with certain connotations, because of people like Vitalik, who think we should put everything on a blockchain, right? And that isn't what I'm arguing for. What I'm saying is that you have a motivated attacker, and their objective is to deny service to the network. And simply changing one little thing that requires a lot of effort and can be really dangerous to do is not necessarily worth the marginal gain that you're going to get to outsmart the attacker for a day or whatever.
What do you think about this framing? Okay, well, actually, I'll back up. Are you aware of Citri, that level 2, that the VC that's run by, or Jameson Lopp invested in?
This is the out-of-band API for transactions that aren't relayed.
That could be Slipstream from Marathon.
Okay, so remind me what Citria is.
So Citri is like some layer 2. I'm not that familiar with it, but supposedly it's a layer 2 that is going to, quote unquote, unlock more economic activities and incentives on Bitcoin. I'm not 100% sure what they're going to do, but essentially, from what I understood, is that by removing the op return limit, they are able to do their activities not only cheaper, but also reducing the UTXO bloat. Now, I believe you did discuss UTXO bloat in your video, and I'm just kind of wondering, though, doesn't that kind of seem like the carrot on the end of the stick? Like, when I listen to this whole story, I feel like we're trying to pick between the lesser of two evils, but we're still somehow getting something we don't want. And when I say we, it's terrible, because everybody is an individual, right? Like, so this is how I end up confused,
right. So, like, really, it's ultimately irrelevant whether or not we want whatever Citria is. I don't know very much about it, but it's layer 2, right? So we're not talking about something that involves, they're not going to be doing anything. If in order to be a layer 2, it can only do things that are allowed by the laws of the Bitcoin network. So and this is where, like, a lot of this conversation has been confused by what are, in my opinion, bad actors, because relay policy isn't the laws of the network. So, and I explained this a lot in my video, to try to give people a better understanding of what's really happening here, is that you could say that users need the ability to filter out transactions out of the mempool, but you're not changing what goes into the blockchain. You might be making it a little bit more inconvenient or a little bit harder, but you're not actually changing what is and is not allowed. So it's really kind of a misdirection, in my opinion, to uh, give users the impression that they can have that kind of an impact with such inconsequential changes.
Mm-mm. Yeah, this I've been trying to think of an analogy, right? Like a proper analogy for all of this, because essentially, I try to, when I look at Bitcoin, I look at the network, I try to extrapolate that out to human behavior. So granted, right, in society, we've got the government enforces violence, we've got laws, all of that stuff. And essentially, when I look at Bitcoin, I think to myself, okay, so this is the type of scenario where there's going to be a bunch of actors doing something that I don't necessarily agree with, but they are playing within the rules. So it kind of makes me think of like a firewall, right? Where all of this activity is going on all around you anyways, but you as an individual are choosing not to um not to help I guess propel that activity, or not helping it circulate.
Yeah, I mean, in Bitcoin, consensus code is law, right? And I think
Yeah.
people have lost this because there's the mantra that code is law. Um, Not all code is law, right? Like you can write code on your computer and have it do whatever you want, and I have no say in what that code does. The
Hmm.
only code that is law in Bitcoin is the code that we've all agreed on, and that is the consensus code. So a motivated person, a motivated attacker in particular, is going to find a way to attack within the bounds of whatever you allow. So if you want to try to change that behavior and have a meaningful impact on it, you have to change the laws. And what I'm saying is that changing the laws is not really an effective mechanism of combating spam in the first place, because the attacker can just adjust slightly. So, um, it, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, and it just made me think of the incentives, right? Like that's kind of what it leads to. So, I mean, are attackers really incentivized? I'm
Sure, well, sure. I think they are. They're not incentivized by anything intrinsic to Bitcoin. They're incentivized about disrupting it. They're incentivized about by creating chaos. Because when you create chaos,
mm,
you have an asymmetric advantage because you're the one that's responsible for the chaos. You know what's going on. No one else does, right? So you create an environment that's really confusing and really disruptive, and then that gives you asymmetric opportunity to take advantage of people. So, um, what that means is you might be able to stir up support for a fork coin. You might be able to dump on people, taking advantage of the fact that they don't have a good idea of what's going on because of the chaos that you're causing. You might be, like a lot of people make the mistake of thinking about users and miners and VCs, all these people, like they're all separate entities. But in a lot of
mm,
cases, they're not, right? Like miners are users. Miners run nodes. So like just
yeah,
because you run a node doesn't make you're not like a different class than the miner who also runs a node. They're also users, right? So they get a say in whatever the laws of the network are too. And arguably, they get a little bit more say than you do because they get to create the blocks. And of course, like we have stuff that people are working on to make it so that this isn't the block template creation isn't as centralized in terms of like the mining pools that run the stratum thing and give users the ability that contribute to the mining pool to outline their own block templates and stuff. And all that's fine, right? But that isn't really getting at the core problem of the fact that the chaos and the information warfare causes disruption and causes uncertainty, particularly among people that are less technically inclined. And there's a lot of opportunity for bad actors to profit off of that asymmetry. And because of the fact that you don't know, one bad actor could be a miner, could be a user, could be the spammer, right? And they could be mining their own transactions and just clawing back their own fees, right? So if I was a bad guy and my goal was to attack the network and I had $100 million, the first thing that I would do would be to acquire a bunch of hash power because then I could just mine my own transactions and all that money that I'm paying to get that spam in the network is going right back in my pocket. And I can just keep doing it longer. So like it isn't a matter of trying to come up with some creative way of disincentivizing that behavior because those people are not operating within your framework of assumptions. Their
yeah.
their goal is to disrupt, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I appreciate you. I appreciate you answering that. But and it also got me thinking as you were explaining that. So, do you think that this is ultimately all a distraction from the what could be the bigger issue, which is minor centralization, or more specifically, I guess you'd say mining template creation centralization? Do
No,
you
I
think
don't think
that?
so. I don't
No.
think that that's really an issue. I think that I think that that's being addressed. I think that there's a lot of work being done to ensure that that isn't a possibility. And actually, the decentralizing of minor capability with the work on these block templates is going to make it easier for spam to get into the network. For any spam that still abides by the rules of the consensus law to find its way into the blockchain. That's not going to people seem to have this misconception that if we just further decentralize mining, that's going to inhibit spam. But it's actually the other way around, because you're lowering the barrier of entry for the spammers to get their spam into the blockchain. And that isn't, that's just kind of, it is what it is, right? I'm not
Mm.
trying to crap on the efforts to decentralize mining by any means. I think that that's a good thing, because we need Bitcoin to be censorship resistant,
Mhm.
like in terms of what is and is not a valid Bitcoin transaction, which is determined by consensus code. So, but if you're lowering the barrier of entry to where the smaller and smaller players can create their own block templates and submit a block with whatever transactions they want, that as long as they're valid transactions, into the network, then you're lowering the barrier of entry for spammers to do that too, right? Like it's
Mhm.
a double-edged sword. So there is trade-off that comes with that.
So you also you made a comment in the video which I thought was really interesting, and it had to do with essentially um, removing the opportune limit would possibly allow for a more a more level playing field, right?
Mhm.
Because now all of a sudden, if I understood correctly, we're taking away the incentive from a Mara to run a slipstream type of protocol.
Mhm.
But then on the other hand, we're also, and this is where it gets tricky. This is where the framing gets tricky. Are we incentivizing people or businesses to come along and create this type of I don't even know what to call it. Uh,
Yes, there's a
I don't know
divergence
what to call spam. I know it's terrible, but
there's a divergence in design philosophy here. We have like the Bitcoin core design philosophy, which is like, hey, we've got there is this user facing ability to filter what your mempool is willing to relay to other nodes on the network. So you've got a mempool, and it's just this batch of transactions that are not yet in the blockchain. They're not enshrined in the single source of truth yet. They're just hanging out, and they're bidding on the next block, saying, "Hey, I'll pay you this much money if you take all this data and you put it in the blockchain."
Mhm.
And what the Bitcoin core design philosophy says is, okay, we've got a lot of these transactions that are getting in the blockchain now that are not being relayed by the mempool, which from an engineering perspective is an inefficiency, because it's creating data asymmetry. And the opposing design philosophy, which is like the Knots crew, and Luke is really the spear tip of this, is pushing this idea that like that users need to be increasing that information asymmetry, refusing to relay, refusing to share certain information with other participants in the network about what wants to get into the blockchain, even though they're perfectly valid Bitcoin transactions. We want to increase the information asymmetry and make it harder for people to obtain that information. But that's actually an inefficiency, like in terms of like designing and engineering protocol, right? Like we don't want to make Bitcoin harder to use. We don't want to make Bitcoin, we don't want to create situations where certain people have advantages that other people don't, because they're able to build custom APIs and obtain those transactions out of band, because it just makes it harder for the smaller people to compete with, they don't have the complete picture, right? Like information is power. The more information you have, the better. And you're not effectively stopping that spam from getting into the blockchain. You're just not telling people that it's hanging out waiting to get in, right? So it really creates this environment where you're working against the incentives, because the incentives are, what the Bitcoin core design philosophy is, all right, let's just go ahead and remove this limit because it's arbitrary. These transactions are getting through anyway. Let's remove the limit and let everybody see the complete picture. And it violates this diverging design philosophy that says, no, we need to restrict people's access to that information. They shouldn't be able to see it. We shouldn't relay it. I don't want my node to relay it. And I'm upset that you're taking that ability away from me. And it's like I said, it's a divergence in design philosophy.
So I guess what I'm thinking of is that, because I believe that now the latest update is that they're going to leave the configuration options in there, but then change the data carrier size, the default for the data carrier size. So it gets me thinking. Do you think that that is a like a decent compromise? Like, personally, when I was going through this, I was thinking to myself, why not just leave the configuration options in there? And, on my node, if I decide that I simply don't want to, facilitate this data, that's my own choice, but I'm still not breaking consensus. But
Sure,
from what
yeah.
I mean, do you think that's a decent compromise? Because I am seeing that, what is it? I believe it was Calais BTC. He said a good compromise between both camps could be to change the op-return defaults as originally intended and leave users the option to adjust their node's parameters.
Yeah, I mean, that's why this is so strange, is just because it's an inconsequential change either way. Like, it's actually a really, really minor technical change to remove. Because it doesn't affect anything, right? Like, it on net, it's potentially a little bit damaging because it's creating information asymmetry. But like on the face of it, it's kind of irrelevant. Like, it just isn't that important because it's kind of just like a feature that isn't really all that useful. It doesn't really impact anything. So the decision was made to remove it. And I view this kind of like, in a sense, that a lot of people have developed superstitions around this because they believe that it's doing more than it actually is. So they want to have the option available. They don't want that option taken away from them because they're superstitious about what it actually does. Like, they think that if they keep doing it, they're making a difference, but it's actually impacting nothing at all. And Bitcoin Core is just a set of protocols and processes for designing the best Bitcoin. And that comes with a lot of trade-offs, right? Like, engineering decisions always come with trade-offs. And one of those trade-offs is that, like, Bitcoin is limited in its capability of stopping spam. It can't prevent spam. It can rate limit spam because of proof of work and deterministic blocks, but it can't just like prohibit spam because there's really no way to know whether or not a transaction is spam. You can take a guess, right? Like, you can develop a reasonably informed opinion and look at a transaction and say, like, pretty sure that's spam. But at the end of the day, you're still just guessing, right? And not to mention the fact that the person that included that information in the blockchain paid for it. So in terms of how the network functions, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter either way at all, whether or not you remove it or leave it in. But the more prudent thing to do from an engineering perspective is to remove it because it doesn't do anything.
Okay, so let me ask you this though, because I'm also wondering, so by removing it, does it actually set a precedent? Like, is that even true that by removing this limit, it sets a precedent for, kind of like the open playing field? I don't necessarily agree that it does.
Yeah, the precedent's already there because these transactions are already in the blockchain, right? So they're already getting through, despite the fact that there's a limit, right? So the limit clearly isn't doing anything because the transactions are valid. Like, at the consensus level, there is no limit on the amount of data that you can put in an op return. Like, you're only limited by like the total amount of information that you could put in a transaction. Op return itself has no limit as far as I'm aware at the consensus level. So like, whatever you decide you think that limit should be at the user level, it's just irrelevant. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. In all fairness, I think it was like a week and a half ago or 2 weeks ago when I did the my first video on this, and obviously, not being as technical as you, I came to the conclusion that this was a giant nothing burger.
Mhm.
But you know how like sometimes it's like you don't know enough to know why you think something is just a giant nothing burger, but you do, and that's what this seems like. This just seems like a lot of noise.
Mhm.
So I guess what's the end? I mean, what is the end goal of all of this? Like this is what I've been trying to figure out. Like so we've got Luke on one side, right? And again, I've also noticed that there's been a lot of back and forth in terms of questioning uh, his client software, right? Saying that there's only one maintainer as opposed to Bitcoin Core, right?
Sure.
Which, if I'm not mistaken, in your video, you said Bitcoin Core is the most heavily used and scrutinized software in the world, or some of the most heavily used and scrutinized software in the world.
Right. Yeah, and look, I'm not trying to necessarily disparage Luke
No, of
because
course not.
Luke is the guy that figured out how to activate SegWit, right? Like Luke is the reason that we have Lightning on Bitcoin.
Yep.
But the difference here is that that code went through the open source approval process and got merged into Bitcoin Core. All the other experts looked at that and said, yeah, no, that looks good. Let's put it in. But Luke has a lot of other ideas that don't get through the open source approval process. They don't make it through the open source review protocol, which is what has gotten us this far, right? So he wants to go off and do his own thing. And he's convinced that users need to run his code and abandon the protocols and processes that are established by Bitcoin Core because he knows better. But Luke has a history of proposing design directions for Bitcoin that would have been very damaging. Like, for example, in 2015 or in 2016, I don't remember exactly when it was, he wanted to change the mining algorithm. And the reason that he wanted to change the mining algorithm is because he wanted to basically brick all of the ASIC miners that were out there. He wanted to destroy the capital that had been invested in Bitcoin mining and building up the infrastructure because he was worried that mining was getting too centralized. And he thought to his rationalization for changing the mining algorithm was, if we just brick all of the existing mining equipment, we'll go back to GPU mining and we can level the playing field. But this would have been remarkably destructive from an economic perspective because you have all of these entrepreneurs that are coming into the space and investing their own hard-earned capital into building up this infrastructure to better support the network. And you don't want to like just drop a grenade at those people and destroy all of that work because you want mining to get commoditized. You want it to be more well-funded. You want it to be more efficient because that's how the network is secured. So, to me, it's about the process, not the individual. And Bitcoin Core has a process, and I'm not saying that that process is perfect, and I'm not saying that the engineers that work on that process are infallible. I'm saying that it's open source. I'm saying that anybody can contribute to it, and I'm saying that it's the one place where we have the most eyes, the most experienced eyes, and the most experts. And the likelihood of us making a major mistake in design direction is much smaller in Bitcoin Core than it is in a place like Knots. And especially when we start talking about making changes that affect the laws that everybody that participates in the network agrees to. It's just, in my opinion, the road that Luke's on inevitably will lead to some kind of consensus split and two different tokens. And then it will be up to everybody else. And so a big part of Bitcoin's design direction is focused on making changes by making changes while minimizing the possibility of ever causing a network split, because that's really, really hard for users to navigate. I don't think it's a coincidence that after we had the whole Bitcoin Cash thing happened, for those of you that weren't around, the Bitcoin Cash thing happened and everybody kind of got their Bitcoin Cash airdrop. And then a lot of other follow-on forks happened after that where people were getting Bitcoin Gold and Bitcoin Diamond and all this stuff. And after Bitcoin Cash, it kind of became more clear. It's like, oh, they're just doing the same thing. It's just nonsense. Just sell it. You can get rid of it and get more Bitcoin with it. But it wasn't clear to everybody, right? It wasn't clear to everybody which one was going to be the winner. A lot of people lost, and it creates opportunities that are risky. And we had a very, very long 2-year bear market after the whole Bitcoin Cash thing happened. And in my opinion, it's because there was a lot of new uncertainty that got introduced to the ecosystem that a lot of people didn't know how to navigate. So the only option that they had was to just take a step back and say, oh, look, I don't know what's going on with this Bitcoin thing, but I don't understand it. And you don't want that. You don't want to introduce uncertainty to a network that is designed to instill trust in the users, right? And I don't mean trust in the sense that like you're just blindly trusting the experts. I mean verifiable trust.
Yeah, or as you were saying that, I was thinking verifiable certainty. So, because I mean, to a certain extent, right? That's exactly what the Bitcoin network provides, right? Is this kind of like this layered certainty, and of course, with every block that's produced, with every block that's mined, right, we end up having another layer of certainty on top of it. I do want to.
If I could just say, I just wanted to like reiterate, Bitcoin Core works to avoid consensus splits because they're dangerous for users. Because we don't want we don't want people to get hurt, right? Like we don't want people to make the wrong choice when they're faced with like a dramatic choice with a lot of economic consequence and end up on the wrong side of it because it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary risk. And it's why, whenever there's changes and upgrades that are proposed to Bitcoin, there's a lot of discussion about activation and consensus, is because we want to make sure before we make any changes to the laws that pretty much everybody agrees on it. And the problem with a change like, hey, we need to change the laws so that we can stop this particular type of spam, is that there's not consensus for that. So you're going to get a split.
This is what I'm afraid of. So when I first came to Bitcoin, so I came to Bitcoin in like 2015 for medium of exchange. I was a degen, still a degen, but that's how I got introduced to Bitcoin. And then, obviously the fork wars happened. I did not understand what the hell was happening. I did not understand any of this. But immediately I felt confused. And I think that people, newer people that come to the space, they're just kind of picturing this kumbaya type of thing where like all of a sudden they just have this other token for free and they get to dump it and make all kinds of money and yay, this is it's not that fun.
Right.
I got to be honest, for being a noob at that time, I wasn't sure what to do. And sadly, right, like I was looking for hopium crutches, right? I was looking for people that knew better than me to explain to me either why I'm right or why I'm wrong, or just give me objective ideas or objective points that I can refer to at least, make my own decision. So for people out there who think that this is just going to be this walk in the park, I mean, if we end up going the route of the chain split, I got to tell you, I am definitely not looking forward to that.
Yeah. So where this comes from, where this originates, is this fallacy that Bitcoin and Bitcoiners are a community with a shared culture. It's not true, right?
No.
There are communities of people that use Bitcoin that have a shared ethos and a shared culture. But in terms of the Bitcoin network, the only thing that we all agree on is whatever the laws are, right? Anybody can use Bitcoin. Bitcoin is for enemies. You might not agree with those people on a lot of things, but as long as they agree with you about what the rules of the network are, they're allowed to participate. And that's what makes Bitcoin an open monetary network. So don't assume that there is some culture to Bitcoin that's extrinsic to what's enforced by the laws. It's a mistake. And people are under the impression that there is a certain culture that needs to be enforced, but they're not going to be able to enforce it without changing the laws. And there's not support to change the laws. So that's just a reality that you have to contend with. And like you're making a good point. It's scary to be faced with uncertainty. Even with me, I feel more well equipped to navigate this than a lot of people. I could still choose wrong, right? Like in the event of a fork. And I see someone in your chat says, well, what's the big deal? You can just hold the BTC and hold the BCH, just hold on to both of them, right? And then you win no matter what. But see, this is a fallacy too, because you can also choose to hold dollars, right? You can choose to hold some dollars and some Bitcoin, or you could be like me and just hold Bitcoin. You don't hold dollars because dollars are shit coins. And if you hold dollars, there's an opportunity cost on that capital and it's getting devalued. Your ice cube is melting. Anybody that held any amount of Bitcoin Cash felt that pain Bitcoin Cash wicked up to like $3,000 on the very first day. Coinbase crashed and it never recovered. It has done nothing but grind lower year after year after year after year. And that's money out of your pocket that you lost that could have gone into Bitcoin. Every decision has an opportunity cost.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I can tell you from my experience when that whole fork war happened, I got rid of BCH as soon as I could. You know what I mean? It was one of those things where I felt like it was like a, the hot potato. You just got to get rid of it. Like once I understood, or at least once I quote unquote picked a side, so to speak. Now that's kind of the other thing about this. Before we wrap up, right? I feel like there is a lot of that because you're talking about this homogenous community, or that people like to create the idea of this homogenous community, but there really isn't one. So unfortunately, right, there's just a whole bunch of people looking to figure out what side they should, right, that they should choose. And I guess, for my final question to you on this one, what would you say? What would you say to those people right now that, even after all of this, they're still confused, they don't know what to do? What would you tell them?
I would tell you that in moments of uncertainty, the best thing to do is to stay calm and to not make reckless decisions. And I can't tell anybody what to do. People are going to do whatever they want, but I'm going to continue to run Bitcoin Core because it's the software with the most eyes, with the most review. It is the reference implementation for what is consensus, right? And if I'm just like, I've been telling people on Twitter, man, like if you guys go down this road, there will be a fork. Like whether you see it coming or not, there will be a fork, and I'm going to dump your fork. Yep. So you won't be on my team anymore if you continue down this road, right? And I'm not even necessarily saying that I completely disagree with your ethos and everything you're trying to do and I hate you. I'm saying that this is where your road takes you, and I'm not going to be on your team anymore when you get where you're going.
Very well said. Very well said, man. All right, so we're gonna wrap it up. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your perspectives on this. I think it's really important for the, like I said, for the newer plebs, who don't know who weren't here before. I think that you give a really good objective perspective about this, and really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was fun.
If anybody wants to get in touch with you or harass you, whatever it is, tell them where they can find you.
Twitter, formerly known, or no, X, formerly known as Twitter. I am at Heavily Armed C. I'm the Heavily Armed Clown. I'm not fun at parties.
I love the bio. It's absolutely awesome. All right, guys, that information is going to be in the show notes. That is going to do it for us for this episode. This live episode of Pleb Underground. Don't forget to check us out on our audio-only platforms, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This episode's going to be uploaded a little bit later today, should be available tomorrow. And if you decide to stream us sats, check us out on fountain.fm. Guys, thanks again for tuning in. I will catch you on the next one. Take it easy.